Hello, and thank you for tuning in to History Repeating, a history talk show where we discuss crucial history that you should know. Dare we let history repeat itself. I'm your host, Meghan Hughes, and joining me is my co-host, Tim Rapone.
Hello.
And the history that we will be discussing today could not be any more wildly different.
Yeah, we're kind of doing
We're spicing things up.
It's not connected. It's just two different things.
Previously, we had mentioned celebrating Women's History Month, but I'm kind of backtracking on that in today's episode.
Well, we did that. We did that already.
Yeah, I guess so. But I wanted to celebrate the whole month. But we also didn't really get to celebrate Black History Month a whole lot, so my topic does have to do with Black history.
That's true.
But Tim is very interested in
I'll be talking about
ancient history.
Yeah, that's one way to put it. The causes of the First World War, which is something people don't really know on average.
Most people don't typically think about World War I. It's always been about World War II.
Is that the one with Hitler?
Yeah.
I hear that a lot.
Yeah. World War I, though, set a lot of the precedents for World War II to even occur.
And that's what we wanted to do with this podcast. We want a radio show. We wanted to highlight topics in history that people typically don't have a thorough understanding about, and hopefully illuminate some dark spaces in your historical education.
That's a beautiful way to put it.
I'm a poet like that.
You are listening to History Repeating on Hillsborough College's Hawk Radio, live from Ybor City. And today, I have the privilege of speaking about the Freedom House Ambulance Service, which is something I don't think a lot of people would know by name.
I was really surprised to learn what this was, because you don't even think about how this service started. That ambulances and EMT response had been. My idea of it was that it had existed for a long time, and it figured
made
at least
practical
the 40s.
Sense. At least before the late 1960s.
Yeah.
For sure.
I guess if you just had a heart attack, you just had to get in a car. You had to find your own ride.
You just had to go in a paddy wagon to the hospital.
Or the police.
Yeah. But they couldn't do much for you while you're in there.
Yeah.
So for any of our viewers who have seen the hit HBO Max show...
Oh, you're actually going to mention this? Oh.
Yeah.
Oh, okay.
The hit HBO Max show, The Pit, that is what inspired today's segment, is because they have brought it up on their show. Being a show based in Pittsburgh, it makes sense. But basically, in episode 8 of season 1, they mention a patient who was a member of the Freedom House Ambulance Service. Of course, the character is entirely fictional, but the Freedom House Ambulance Service is a real piece of Pittsburghian history, as well as United States history, because this was something that sparked EMT training and medical response education across the whole country, and kind of revolutionized ambulance systems.
I thought you were just going to play this off like, this is something I knew, guys. I just always knew about this.
I'm going to be honest. I'm always honest.
You got it from TV.
The
moral of the story is that you actually can learn stuff from watching television.
Especially The Pit. It is a very good show.
It is a very good show. Tell us all about this, Meghan Hughes.
So in the 1960s, if any of our viewers or listeners are familiar with that decade, you'll know that the rise of suburbanization and highway development was a very big thing at the time. And of course, this led to an increase in car accidents and car-related accidents, which also increased demand in hospital services. And at the time, most services kind of pertained to basic first aid and rapid transportation via a police paddy wagon. It was very bare bones, and police weren't often trained, especially in these kind of medical response fields. And in hospitals, wait times were high, service was poor, and low-income, predominantly Black neighborhoods rarely saw access to these services.
Which also where the highways were usually constructed right over or through.
Which meant that there would be a higher increase
And another thing, too, I'd like to mention,
accidents.
because you mentioned the increase of accidents, this is something I got from my dear friend Rebecca Ankrum, was that cars back then were constructed of much stronger material and they wouldn't crumple. So the car themselves back then would survive an accident, but the person inside would be thrown around like a little jingle bell.
Makes sense.
Which means car accidents were exponentially more fatal back in the 60s.
That kind of seems like cars crumpling seems like a very trial and error thing, which is very unfortunate. Another thing that is kind of interesting is that before ambulance services existed in the U.S., you could also have first response from local funeral homes.
Oh, that's expedited shipping.
Yeah, like you could ride in a hearse to the hospital, and if you didn't make it, you were very fortunate that you were in the hands of someone who knew what to do. And this was
they got the formaldehyde right in the back.
This was a very big issue, especially in Pennsylvania. At the time, the then governor of Pennsylvania and former mayor of Pittsburgh, David L. Lawrence, had a heart attack and arrived brain dead at a local hospital in Pittsburgh. And this was something that was absolutely preventable, according to his doctor, who was Dr. Peter Safar, who you'll hear his name a lot throughout this podcast segment. After David L. Lawrence had passed, Dr. Safar realized that response times needed to be quicker and first aid training needed to be institutionalized in some way, and the system needed to be improved. So he initiated a program along with Philip Hallen, who was the then president of Maurice Falk Medical Fund and chairman of the OEO Health Committee. They both wanted to combat the problem of slow response times in emergency care, as well as the lack of employment opportunities for Black Pittsburghers. This led them to the Freedom House Enterprises, a pre-existing organization that at the time was dedicated to helping Black Pittsburghers. I don't know why Pittsburghers is such a tough word to say. It was dedicated to helping Black Pittsburghers find employment, register to vote, and assisted in organizing NAACP meetings, as well as providing additional resources for Black Pittsburghers in need. Also assisting in this program was the Presbyterian University Hospital in Pittsburgh. So Freedom House Enterprises collaborated with this doctor and this chairman to recruit 25 Black men from the Hill District in Pittsburgh, which was a low-income, predominantly Black neighborhood that regularly suffered from lack of access to care. It was one of the lowest response times, one of the least care-before neighborhoods when it came to first aid and police response.
It's a glorious review for the city of Pittsburgh right there.
And it is also a story with an unfortunate ending that will probably anger many of our listeners, but we'll get to that. According to EMS World, many recruits that were hired by the Freedom House Enterprises, not hired, they were volunteers, that were recruited were, many were unemployed, more than half of them had not graduated from high school, and some were also veterans of the Vietnam War. So the Freedom House Enterprises provided education and training, teaching these recruits to become the first modern EMTs, or emergency medical technicians. Training included processes like CPR, intubation, defibrillation, which is what is done in response to a heart attack, all of which had never been performed by first responders and instead was only performed on-site at hospitals. This decreased response time and increased survivability for those requiring care. And this training became the model for the national standard of EMT training, according to the University of Pittsburgh. This was also all under Dr. Peter Safar's guidance. He's accredited with becoming the founder, the father of CPR. Not only that, but the modern ambulance was designed under Peter Safar's supervision. And he also designed the first intensive care unit for hospitals. So the program began in 1967 and was wildly successful for everyone involved. It benefited Black communities, it saved lives and decreased mortality rates in car accidents, and improved hospital response time. In their first year, the ambulance project transported more than 4,600 patients in Pittsburgh, primarily from predominantly Black, low-income neighborhoods, which is an amazing feat,
yeah, that's
especially for the time.
Incredible.
A According to ambulance driver Jerry Esposito, and these are his words, "This was a poverty program that was meant to fail. Instead, not only did it work, but it helped propel emergency care into another arena." Another noteworthy figure in the Freedom House ambulance service was Nancy Caroline, who was at the time a medical student in her residency at Presbyterian Hospital. Dr. Peter Safar appointed Caroline as medical director of the ambulance project. She was considered the mother of paramedics, according to the Freedom House documentary website, which is not a documentary I have seen, but I have heard a lot of good things about it, so it might be worth checking out. All right, here's where things take a turn for the worse.
You can never have a happy ending.
No. In 1970, politician and World War II veteran Peter
Start the word with politician, that's how you know it's going bad.
Yep. Peter F. Flaherty was elected mayor of Pittsburgh, where he served until 1977. He directly opposed the Freedom House ambulance service, arguing that public services should be overseen by the city. Dr. Safar stated racial prejudices with white police officers eager to maintain control of ambulances citywide were the driving force in Mayor Flaherty's opposition of the Freedom House, but there have also been it has also been said that he was trying to appeal to the police union. I think both can be true at the same time.
Yeah, that's kind of about the same thing.
When Freedom House requested to expand their contract with the city, Flaherty not only denied, but cut their budget by more than 50%. Multiple additional ordinances were passed to inhibit the functioning of Freedom House, such as barring ambulances from using sirens in certain areas, which decreased efficiency and increased response times. Not only that, but these areas were high-density population areas. And eventually,
just playing with lives for politics.
Yeah. It all came to a head in 1974 when the city proceeded on plans for a citywide ambulance system staffed by police officers who would be trained as paramedics. And of course, this used the foundation set by Dr. Peter Safar and Freedom House Enterprises. It was later announced that the city would end its contract with the Freedom House, and the Freedom House ambulance services officially ended on October 15th, 1975. While some Freedom House EMTs...
That's incredibly recent.
Yeah. I mean, that's in both my parents' lifetimes. Yeah. It's something that it should be more known, honestly.
I thought ambulances were well established in the 50s.
I figured by the 20s or 30s it would make sense, honestly.
Yeah, you'd think like an early version would have started back then. Like if this story had started in the 20s, that'd make perfect sense, but I guess not.
And while some Freedom House EMTs were rehired by the city, many were dismissed, either fired for previous criminal records or prevented by exams containing medical material that wasn't covered in their Freedom House training, seemingly as a way to weed out black EMTs. A total of 26 Freedom House EMTs were hired by the city, with more than half leaving a year into the program. So they were not set up for success in that facet. But despite its sad ending, it is a testament to not only Pittsburgh history, but medical history for the entire nation.
It's one of those things where you don't even think about it because you think that's a service that's just kind of like obvious, or like you would always assume that was there. But it's one of those things where you realize that it took someone to think of that. Like this wasn't always obvious. It took someone to think of this very crucial service and to invent it and to create it. Kind of like washing your hands. Everyone today, washing your hands is so basic and so universal. You think that people just always knew to do that, and you realize when you go back and you see that actually no, someone had to think that washing your hands is important. Which is just, I mean, again, that's just how important and how critical these types of advancements are, and this really is sad that I think that no one knows about this.
I mean, there's still surviving EMTs.
It's within a lifetime. It's not that long ago.
Not that historic.
It's still modern. It's still modern, really.
I would consider this modern history.
So yeah, I think that's something more people should know about, because, I mean, that Yeah, it's hard to really underestimate how many lives that saves. I mean, you're talking like 20 minutes where people could have died on the road, and now they're
I mentioned
living.
that they treated 4,600 patients, but they transported over 5,800 and saved countless lives. And it is truly fantastic what they did. They not only created a service that benefited the people of Pittsburgh, but also increased employment in predominantly black neighborhoods that were considered unemployable at the time.
It's also it's a great story of self-organization and community organization, because this was a problem, in black neighborhoods. These are issues that were not being addressed by the state because they didn't want to or didn't care to. And so they found their own solution and they made it work. And they ended up setting the standard for the whole country and the whole world. And that's really inspiring. And that really goes to show that when the state, local, federal government isn't performing their service as they should, it's up to the communities to fill in that gap.
And that should be said. Support your local community organizations. That's the message of this episode.
Absolutely.
It should also be noted that Flaherty, the mayor, was also opposed to it because it was community organized. He went on record saying that anything funded by the city should be controlled by the city. So it was definitely a matter of control and political benefit.
That to me seems like, I guess this is now personal guessing game here, but that to me sounds like an excuse for racial prejudice.
I agree.
To say that the city has
I think
to
there's
control.
Sufficient evidence to say that it was racial prejudice as well.
Yeah, that doesn't really add up, especially when it's such a universal good being done here. They're just saving lives. There's no...
Not to mention, this was partially during segregation.
Oh, that's definite. I mean, we're talking late 60s. I mean, racism didn't go away overnight. You had equal civil rights in 1965. So we're talking like a couple years ago at this point that African Americans were only just seen as equal citizens.
Tensions were increasingly high too, and we have talked about this before for Black History Month. We talked about the Woolworth sit-ins, which only happened, I wouldn't even say a full decade before this.
No.
It's incredibly
late 60s, recent. That's when Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated.
Yeah.
And Robert Kennedy was assassinated. So there's a lot going on in this arena of politics.
Robert Kennedy?
Yeah. Well, he was a big advocate for civil rights.
Yes. So. Sorry. I thought you meant John.
Both. A lot of dead Kennedys out there.
But yeah, we'll be coming back to talk more about history, where we continue our discussion with something completely unrelated.
I'll give you a bit of whiplash, but it'll make sense, sort of.
And if you're interested, I got this information from the University of Pittsburgh, which did an incredible summary on all of this. It is worth checking out. There's also a documentary on the Freedom House ambulance services. I'm not sure where it is available to watch, but if you are interested, give it a quick Google search and check out The Pit. It's a very, very good medical drama. Yeah, I wish we were sponsored by HBO Max, but check it out.
It's a good show.
They do talk about a lot of not only Pennsylvanian history, but they talk about Black history, women's history.
Relevant topics.
Medical history, too. It's also a good way to learn some new medical terms. You're listening to History Repeating on Hillsborough College's Hawk Radio, live from Ybor City. We're back, and we're discussing World War I.
Yeah, this is a bit of whiplash from what Meg was talking about. Usually we like to stay on theme, but I was thinking... I didn't really think we'd ever do a full episode themed around this, so I thought I'd just throw it in there because I do like to focus on stuff that people don't really know about, people have questions about, and this is one that everyone knows about it, but like it's World War I is...
I wouldn't even say that. I would say most people don't know the basics of World War I.
It's gotten better in recent years. I've noticed, at least. I feel like there was a sort of collective conscience about 10 years ago where a lot of people were like, hey, I don't know what this war is about. And there's been an increase in movies, games, like 1917 came out, the movie. I know there was one of those PBS documentaries by Ken Burns was on World War I. There has been an increase in interest in World War I in the past 10 years. Did all Netflix, All Quiet on the Western Front as well. movie I personally don't like, but whatever. Um, but so sorry, off the mic. World War I is overshadowed by World War II, which is World War II is the one with Hitler. World War I is no Hitler. So everyone's like, if it wasn't about Hitler, what was going on? Who was the bad guy? Who were we fighting? Why? And then you go back and you're like, okay, I'm going to go read some books, find out why people were fighting this war. And then you go read journals and you're like, why am I fighting this war? And they're like, oh, they didn't know either. Because as we're going to find out, I'd like to go through today, not the whole war, but just the first month before the war, mostly. We'll talk a little bit during the war as well. But I want to talk about, it's called the July Crisis, the diplomatic crisis that plummeted Europe into war in the summer of 1914. Because as you'll see, it gets really quickly out of hand. And we're going to be following a sort of soap opera and this yarn of string that's just going to get quickly tangled up. In fact, it starts even before that. We're going about like 60, 70 years before the war actually started. Because to really understand the war, you got to go back to the 1800s.
It wasn't that far before, anyways. This is a very...
What are you on about?
Barely into the 20th century at that point.
Yeah, but we're going... Now I want to talk about like the 1860s, 1870s when Germany's unifying. Germany beforehand was a confederation of Germanic-speaking states like Prussia, Bavaria, a Prussian by the name of Otto von Bismarck, who was a chancellor for Germany. There were talks about a unified Germany for a while. He decided to realize them. Prussia was a very militarized society that was run by a lot of old oligarchs and aristocrats. And Otto von Bismarck, through a sort of ingenious amount of trick diplomacy, basically fabricated a bunch of wars that ended up pulling the German states together and unifying them as one. He would kind of play politician behind the scenes and kind of set up a chessboard that favored his situation where, like, for example, in the Franco-Prussian War, he would have Prussia go to war with France, and he would make it so that all the German states would want to unify with Prussia, and then they'd get one step closer towards a unified Germany, which in one hand is very ingenious. Many people would call him a genius. This is my personal opinion. I would call that a war hawk. I would call it reckless. I would call it dangerous. You're playing. I think this guy has been. He's celebrated for decades. This is my personal opinion now, but I feel like we're missing priorities. That we think, okay, a unified Germany. It's not always such a bad thing, but is that worth going to war over? Is that how you want to achieve that? Is it really worth going to war with France and killing French and German people in the line of battle over the vision of a unified Germany? I think that's a lot of a detached view of reality. I mean, we're talking about the upper elite aristocratic, old, like nobility families from Europe, and they're just playing with people like pawns.
Can't be said much has changed.
Yeah. That's my personal view of the situation. Of course, he was a very smart man and brilliant man in his own way. But I think that kind of shows that mentality that war is a game is very prevalent to what would eventually put the world in the First World War and kill millions more, which I would say shows that it wasn't really worth it. Anyways, Germany's now a country. They're now the German Empire is now established. And they're kind of late to the game. We're talking mid to late 1800s. Britain's at the height of its colonial power. France is still doing strong in Africa. Italy Italy and Spain have their colonies. Well, not Spain so much anymore, but there's still some colonies around. And the point is that Germany is now a new nation with no colonies, and they are, again, very militant society. And so they are desperately and aggressively trying to catch up to Britain and France to show their power. And again, you can understand that idea that we're a new nation, we want to be strong, but then you're colonizing other places and you're making enemies by doing this. And quickly, Germany becomes watched carefully by the rest of Europe. France obviously lost the Franco-Prussian War, And Russia was very weary with Germany because they share a border with them, and Germany's just this new, very aggressive militant society. And so France and Russia create a defensive alliance. If one or the other gets invaded by Germany, the other one has to join in, which puts Germany surrounded on two ends. France on its left side, Russia on its right side. A two-front war is incredibly difficult to win, and they knew that, which is why they started this alliance, and that made Germany incredibly paranoid. Britain at this point, people didn't know where they'd side. This is when Europe starts creating a series of alliances in the case of war with Germany or war with one another. Germany creates an alliance with Austria-Hungary, and again, that's a defensive alliance meant to combat France and Russia. If one or the other gets invaded, the other one has to help out. Austria-Hungary at this point is a very weak power. They're not like France or Russia, so it's a little laughable, but it's all Germany had because most people weren't very friendly with them. Britain was kind of in the sidelines at this point. I'm getting somewhere. We're going to get to World War I, guys. Just follow along.
No,
so now we're getting these alliances formed because, again, these are colonial powers that are battling for land in Africa, Asia, and not so much the New World anymore, but still the New World a little bit. And they're all battling for power, and it's causing these issues. Germany adds Italy to their triple alliance with Austria. Italy, again, because Italy at that time was a little miffed with Britain for stealing some of its colonial states. And then France and Russia do some PR with Britain in the early 1900s, and they kind of mend, because Britain and France hated each other for centuries since the Middle Ages. So this was actually a widely publicized thing where, hey, we're friends now. In fact, the King of England did a tour in France because they were like, hey, we're buddies now. Let's mend this old patchwork. And so now Britain's a little more friendly with France and Russia, but they're still not sure if they're going to join an alliance with them. But that makes Germany all the more paranoid because now Germany's getting kind of schizophrenic over here because they're like, we're surrounded by people that hate us. We have to go to war now. Again, this is a very militant society. A lot of the war hawks in German society were afraid that if war does not happen soon, Russia will industrialize and fix it, because Russia at this point, its infrastructure is lagging behind the rest of Europe. Their infrastructure will increase to a point where they will be just as strong, if not impossibly stronger than Germany, and that Germany could never win a war with France and Russia, which a lot of people at that time thought was inevitable.
That's so funny, though. That
you see how this is quickly snowballing out of control?
It's just it feels like a lot of paranoid ideas that have built and built and built that, we have to go to war, because if we don't go to war now, then Russia will become stronger than us.
And I want to talk about that a little bit too, because people don't realize how important...
There's no way we can't go to war in any scenario.
Exactly. So Russia at that point had very bad trains, and trains are half the battle with a war in the early 1900s, because that's how you move troops. That's how you move troops around. And Russia was undergoing a massive railroad upheaval, and they were fixing their roads. And so Germany was like, if we don't go to war with Russia now, we're not going to be able to win. Which was a little paranoid, but also a little true. Anyway, so this kind of kindling fire with no fire yet was just kind of people were just adding more kindling to this fire pit, and someone was just waiting to light the match. Also Germany Germany started making their own. They started boosting up their navy and making all these boats and warships, because they were entering not a nuclear arms race, but an arms race with Britain, which had the world's strongest navy, and they were trying to challenge that. And that put them at odds with Britain, because now Britain and Germany are just making more and more warships, trying to outdo one another, and it's just getting worse and worse and worse.
Can't imagine how daunting this would be to be a citizen of Germany or Britain, and you're just watching just this political cause and effect keep building.
That's my next
building.
point. People didn't really care. Because of the alliance system, there hadn't been a major European war and since the Franco-Prussian War in almost 50 years. There had been smaller wars in the Balkans and in Turkey and stuff, but not a major one. So a lot of people in Britain and France, some people, not the politicians, but some people on the lower end, they thought that we're past war.
They needed their own history repeating, so that they wouldn't forget about war. I
believe it was called the Belle Epoque in France, which means beautiful era, because it was peaceful, roughly, for Western Europe. And they're like, maybe we've civilized past war. We don't need war anymore. And because it had been so long since last time they had a major war was when they had muskets. Warfare technology had advanced incredibly in the past 50 years. And so when in early 1900s, when people were talking about a war, they all envisioned it as being very quick. They imagined a really fast victory. I mean, when war did start, the motto was "Home by Christmas." It started in August, didn't end until 1918. And France hadn't even updated their uniforms. Britain had the wisdom to change their uniforms from bright red to brown, khaki brown, because they realized you needed camouflage. Now, France still had bright blue tunics and bright red pants, and in the early battles, of the war, they were getting
their flag.
They were getting mowed down by machine guns fire because of those bright red pants. Because again, the idea of warfare in 1914 was still stuck in 1870.
It's weird
generally,
that war had an aesthetic to it.
But
yes, I guess that is also because
war kind of a sense of nostalgia for it.
Yeah.
And I want to talk about nationalism now because all of Europe is at its colonial height right now. I mean, that is the era of colonialism, the French Empire, the British Empire especially. A sense of nationalism had arisen in the 1800s. People became very proud of their countries, and they would read about their accomplishments overseas and in colonial battles, and they'd say, "Wow,
appearance was a very, very big cause of this war."
And this is a mentality I think a lot of us Americans can relate to, where a lot of people living in Europe they thought, we're untouchable. France is untouchable. Britain's untouchable. Germans were like, we're look at our new navy. We're untouchable. Everyone truly living in Germany and France and Britain really thought that we're going to win because we're the best country on earth. And they're all thinking that the exact same time right before war. And that's why it's just getting worse and worse.
That kind of sounds like a history repeated for Germany.
So I'm getting a little ahead of myself, but when war actually did start, it was met mostly with applause. When the Kaiser Wilhelm announced war with France outside of his palace, it was met with cheerful applause. Young men enlisted in droves because they thought it'd be a quick home by Christmas little adventure because war is kind of fun. Because everyone had a detached view of what war was really like. Anyways, getting back to the actual crisis now, what set the match was in Austria-Hungary. The Archduke Franz Ferdinand was doing a tour.
Now this I know about, and I think quite a few people know about this.
A few years before this, there had been a Balkan War, so tensions in the Balkans were very high. Austria-Hungary was an extremely multi-ethnic. I think it spoke like 30 different languages in its nation because there were Czechs, there were Italians, there were Austrians, there were Hungarians, all sorts of different nationalities within Austria-Hungary. And they had just recently acquired Bosnia-Herzegovina, which upset Serbians a lot. And so a lot of Serbian nationalists, they wanted that to be part of them. And so there was, of course, a terrorist organization, and Archduke Franz Ferdinand was doing a tour through Bosnia as kind of a peace PR tour to try to make goodwill there. But of course, he just ended up stirring flames in a Serbian nationalist terrorist group. It wasn't a very
subtle PR tour either.
It's monarchist. He was, again, very detached. He wasn't aware of the struggles of the working class. No. He was a monarchist, thinking that he just ride his silver chariot through town and people would be wowed by the power of monarchy.
JFK was assassinated too. Very. Hello, everyone.
Yeah.
Detached.
So, funny enough, there were 3 attempts on his life. The first 2 were bombs, I believe, and they set the bomb set off, and somehow the Franz Ferdinand kept living, and they were like, okay, keep the tour going, I guess.
It was timing, I believe.
Then took a wrong. The car took a wrong turn. And
saved his life second time.
Yeah, but then he passed a sandwich shop where Gavrilo Princip was just eating a sandwich. He's part of the terrorist organization. Everyone thought the day was over. They failed. He sees the car going down. He dropped his sandwich and he goes, "Oh my God, it's my time!" He grabs his gun and he shoots and he kills the Archduke, and that sets off a huge crisis. Austria-Hungary at this point was self-conscious, basically. They're a dying empire. They're very paranoid, like Germany is, but Austria is paranoid that all these nationalist movements, all these ethnic organizations will, the different ethnicities will rise up and destroy, and because Austria-Hungary is a monarchy between Austrians and Hungarians, but there's also Czechs and Italians and Poles and all these different little people that kind of want their own country. And so a lot of their paranoias weren't really justified, but it made them really scared, which is why they were so sensitive to a Serbian nationalist group assassinating their Archduke, because it made them paranoid that there is going to be a mass revolution and that it would overthrow and topple the empire and they'd lose all their power. So they decided they had to act strong and act hard. But first they ran to Germany and said, "Oh, Germany, oh, Germany, oh, Germany. Can we bully Serbia?" Because Austria wasn't strong enough, and Russia really liked Serbia. Russia was had a lot of Czechs, it had a lot of Slavic people, and there's a lot of Slavic people in the Balkans. So Russia kind of the Balkans didn't want this really, but Russia, in its own deluded sense of grandeur, thought of themselves as the protectors of the Balkans, and also they wanted an ocean port on the Baltic Sea. That's another reason. So when Austria was bullying Serbia, Russia was standing right there saying, "Hey, not too much on Serbia." So that meant that Austria couldn't do anything to Serbia without Russia getting involved, which meant Austria, again, it's snowballing. Austria had to go to Germany and say, "Hey, Germany, will you back us up on this?" And Germany, again, they shouldn't have done this. They knew the risk, but they were like, we have to back up Austria. In their mind, they were like, if we don't back up Austria now, we're going to lose our best ally, and then we'll miss our window to start war with Russia and still win. So they hand what's called the blank check to Austria, saying, "We give you unconditional support for whatever you do." And that was a big mistake. So then Austria goes to Serbia. Austria gives Serbia a 10-point ultimatum. Most of it's that they have to respond to in 48 hours. Most of it's pretty reasonable. Hard-handed, but doable. They're like, remove all propaganda slandering the great empire of Austria-Hungary, crack down on these terrorist organizations. But the real big one was the last point, which said that Austro-Hungarian officials will conduct the investigation into the assassination in Serbia and destroy the nationalist terrorist organizations. Basically saying, we're going to take over your judicial system for you, which is a threat to Serbian sovereignty. And the real threat there was that if Austria's taking over their judicial system, Austria will then annex Serbia as part of its empire, which was kind of their end goal. Serbia says, "Hey, man, we'll agree to literally every single point on your ultimatum because we really don't want to go to war, but we can't do this last one. Can we negotiate on that?" And also at this point, Britain's saying, "Hey guys, we can mediate this. We can mediate this. Let us mediate." Austria says, "No, you didn't respond to the ultimatum," and they declare war on Serbia. Russia then mobilizes, doesn't declare war, but Russia mobilizes. And they mobilize early before declaring war because their train system sucks so bad. So
by the time they got there, the war would have started.
They didn't necessarily want to go to war, but they wanted to mobilize as a show of force to deter Germany from going to war. But Germany sees the mobilization, and they're thinking, Russia's going to war. So they start panicking, and they send an ultimatum to Russia, and they say, unmobilize in the next 48 hours, or we have to go to war with you. And Russia leaves it on red. They don't respond to it. They ignore it. And so then Germany declares war on Russia, and then Russia declares war on Germany, and then France declares war on Germany, and it all gets out of hand. And then everyone's wondering, what in the world is Great Britain going to do? Because all of mainland Europe is going to war right now. And then, just like what Germany's war plans, again, trains, everything's got to be really fast. They're fighting a two-front war. Russia is huge. So they think we can knock out France before we can knock out Russia. And they've been planning this for about 20 years now. They had a guy named Schlieffen who developed the Schlieffen Plan. And France had to spend all their time in the past 50 years developing a series of intense forts along the German and France border. But in between the northern part of France and Germany is a little country called Belgium, which they had not made any forts around. So Germany, in its wisdom, and Schlieffen, in his wisdom, said, our only hope of knocking France out really early in the war is if we march through unguarded Belgium, even though Belgium is completely neutral in all of this, knock out Paris as soon as possible, and then with France out of the war, they will then turn all their focus on Russia, because Russia at this point will still be mobilizing because their trains suck so bad. And it was a really difficult plan. It had a lot of logistic problems because they had to move incredibly fast. They're talking they have to blitzkrieg basically through Belgium into Paris within a matter of under a month, within like 3 to 4 weeks. That's a huge logistical nightmare. And I believe one of his dying words were,
reinforce the right flank.
Because he died before the war, actually. I'm not exaggerating. He spent a decade working on this plan over every meticulous detail, and I'm not kidding. One of his last words, I forget exactly, but was to reinforce one of the flanks because it was a logistical nightmare. And he ended up dying before the war actually started anyways. But when war came, they enacted the Schlieffen Plan, and Belgium at this point had Every European nation had signed a treaty in the early 1800s guaranteeing Belgium neutrality. They didn't want anything to do with these awful wars anymore. But Germany decided, gotta do what you gotta do. It's us or them. And so they marched right through Belgium.
Poor Belgium.
Britain saw this and they said, we have to go to war now to uphold international law and to protect Belgian neutrality. German military aggression has gone too far, and so Britain declares war on Germany. And now the whole world is at war. And that's not even it.
That's how it got its name.
That's how it started. But then Italy gets involved later on. Japan gets involved, and Ottoman, the Turkey gets involved. America gets involved. It's a whole nightmare. But that's how it all started.
Yeah,
Mexico a little bit, yeah. But Ottoman Empire, kind of in the same situation Austria is. It's a multi-ethnic empire, very paranoid, also dying. It's called the old sick man of Europe for a reason. And so they were like, if we join the war on Germany's side, we'll get back some territory losses against France and Britain, because they had colonized a lot of northern Africa at the expense of the Ottoman Empire. So again, we're seeing colonialism is a huge benefactor for this huge mess of a war. And then later on, when the war enters a stalemate in 1915, Britain and France in their wisdom are like, oh, by the way, Italy used to be allied with Germany and Austria. What happened with that? Italy saw all this happening, and they're like, hey, Germany, you know that alliance we have? We're just not going to do that, because they didn't want to get involved. And that was very wise of them. But then a year later, Britain and France came knocking on their door, and they're like, hey, you know how you really want an empire of your own and how you really want to conquer up all those Italian provinces of Austria-Hungary? If you go to war with us, we'll give you them. And they're like, really? And they went to war. And that was a huge mistake, because the Italian front was one of the worst fronts of the war. They're fighting in the Alpine mountains, literally on cliffs, miles in the air.
For that.
And it was a nightmare. I mean, Italians and Austrians were dying in droves, miles in the sky, falling to their deaths off cliffs. And some of the battle tactics on that front were to literally drop rocks and cause avalanches on top of other enemy lines. That's how brutal it was. And so they got themselves, again, into this mess because they were thinking about land. They're thinking about empires and all this greed. And they were thinking, we're untouchable because we're Italy. America gets involved, ironically. I don't say this often. America gets involved for one of the most reasonable reasons. And I say that with a huge grain of salt, but believe me, compared to the rest of these guys, it makes more sense. Germany had been conducting unrestricted submarine warfare on shipping lanes to weaken the British Empire, and a lot of American ships got caught in the crossfire. A lot of civilians died on ships because German subs had been firing on them and sinking them. And then they had in a plea of desperation, some random German secretary by the name of Zimmermann sent a telegram to Mexico saying, if you join the war on our side, we'll give you back New Mexico and Texas. And this was a Hail Mary. I don't even think the Kaiser knew about it.
Yeah, that was a very random
Mexico
move.
was never going to do that. Germany was just desperate at that point in the war. But America saw this and they were like, last straw, buddy. And you also sunk our ships. We're going to war with you, which makes a bit more sense than Russia went to war, so I got to go to war, and Italy went to war, and then I got to go to war, and it's just a huge mess. And so it's not a surprise that and Japan got involved too for some reason.
It's like a bunch of dominoes lined up.
Japan wanted a bunch of colonies that Germany had in East Asia. They're like, so out of nowhere they went, guys, I want part. I want to get involved. It's a mess, and it's not surprising that you see all of this is started by a lot of greed and a lot of detachment from the political classes and the monarch classes of Europe. It's not a surprise that out of this rose the Russian Revolution, a lot of social movements, because a lot of soldiers were disillusioned. I mean, again, they went into this so proud of their nations and so thinking war is just nothing, and the next thing you know, they're beating to each other to death in trenches with clubs. It's the most horrific war ever at that point in human history, and it sparks revolution. It sparks strife. Even the French almost had a revolution because they had a mass strike in 1917 where a lot of French soldiers said, we refuse to fight any longer for a long time. And that there was a huge fear that there'd be another French Revolution.
Well, it's ironic because this war had no purpose. There was no end goal aside from imperialism.
Yeah, imperialism was really the main goal at the end of the day, but on the ground level, people realized, what does that matter to us?
Exactly.
And that's why I think the moral of this story is priorities, because, again, are colonies worth this? Is Germany being a little stronger worth this?
At least in World War II, most countries knew what they were fighting for, or at least who they were fighting against. They had a purposeful
There was an
enemy.
ideological battle
Yes.
between fascism and I guess, I mean, it's a little more gray than that, but ideas of democracy and freedom and
you could at least clearly define a purpose for World War II rather than World War I, which seemed like a long string of dominoes that got pushed for the stupidest reasons.
I'm shocked that I managed to finish it in time.
I know.
And it just on one quick anecdote. Remember that Germany had that very proud battleship, that navy they spent so many years fighting with Britain for? They're like, we're going to rival you one day in the seas. Well, when war finally happened, Britain enacted a huge blockade over the North Sea, and Germany's navy sat in port for almost the entire war. And there was one naval battle in which almost all their ships got destroyed. So
is that when Germans suffered a famine from the blockade?
Oh my God, yeah, that's another reason, because a lot of the casualties were civilian in this war, and
Almost
a lot of Germans.
Over 700,000 Germans.
I read a whole book on this. A lot of Germans starved to death, which is really it's tragic that a lot of infant mortality spiked. Bread lines are down the street. The German people, I mean, really suffered. I mean, all nation people suffered during this, but Germany and France and Russia really suffered the worst because Germany was basically starved to death. And a lot of my sources before we go out, Guns of August is a book about the July crisis, which is a really great source on this. The First World War by John Keegan. Open.edu had a chronology of the July crisis that was very useful in getting this concise, and IWM.org, How the World Went to War in 1914, is also a very helpful article and refreshing my memory on this. So don't go to war, guys. This is a very
packed show. And I'm sad we didn't even get to touch on all the aspects of World War I, especially.
We can do a follow-up, because there's a lot to talk about.
We didn't even talk about the Xmas truce.
That's a nice little story.
Yeah. For a little bit of hope. Yeah. For our listeners.
But that's just how it started, and God, I hope you've got all of that. It's dizzying.
I think it's been long enough for me to be able to say that is a little funny.
It is ridiculous. It's absurd, and you could probably make a great play about that. A great comedy. There probably is a great comedy out there about that.
About it from the politics side, it's ridiculous, but don't go to war.
Don't go to war, guys. Thanks for listening.
We appreciate it, and you'll see us next week on History Repeating.